Welcome to our JavaScript web course. In this video, we will cover the date object. The date object is a predefined JavaScript object. Notice the syntax. We have uppercase D, date, and two parentheses. The date object has many methods. These methods allow us to return the day, the number, month, year, hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds, and also coordinated universal time values. The date object is commonly used to retrieve the date, but also to perform date calculations. We see that on Canvas all the time with setting availability for different modules. And if you've ever worked with eBay, the auctions are set to go off and to stop at a different time. The date object officially begins January 1st, 1970 at midnight. This is referred to as the epoch or the Unix epoch. For reference, there are 86,400,000 milliseconds in one day, which is used when performing calculations. In order to use the date object, you first need to create a new instance of it. So here I have let today equals new date. If I were to use an alert to display the value of today, this is what I would see. Notice that this screenshot was taken in the year 2015. The variable today holds all of the milliseconds that have elapsed since January 1st, 1970 at midnight. So let's take a look at the methods of the date object. In order to access the methods, you first need to create the instance of the date object, which we have here, and it is stored in the variable today. So if I were to use today.getDate, it would return the day number of the month, for example, 1 to 31. I can also set that in a variable, let month day equal today.getDate, and I can use that variable. Today.getDay returns an integer for the day of the week. It does not return the name. JavaScript represents the days of the week starting at 0 for Sunday up to 6 for Saturday. Again, we can access this method today.getDay and store that in a variable which will hold a numeric value from 0 to 6. We also have the getMonth method that returns an integer for the month, January being 0, December being 11. So we can use today.getMonth, store that value in a variable. That variable will hold a value from 0 to 11. We also have the getFullYear method. It returns the year as 4 digits. So we can say today.getFullYear, store that in a variable. That variable will return 2022, which is the year this recording was made. We also have the getYear method, which returns the year as a 2-digit date. So we can store that in a variable, and it would return 22. We can use all of these methods, plus a little bit additional JavaScript, to display the complete date on a web page. The methods of the date object also hold information about time. We have the getTime method. Use today.getTime and store that in a variable. That variable will return all the milliseconds since midnight, January 1st, 1970. We have the getHours method. If we were to use today.getHours and store that in a variable, it would return the current hour, starting at 0, ending at 23. These are universal times. If you wanted to display the time on your web page, you would need to have some JavaScript in order to convert it into a time that we recognize, such as an AM or PM 1 to 12. The getMinutes method returns the current minute 0 to 59. So today.getMinute, store that in a variable, would return the current minute. Again, if you were to display that as a clock, you would need to do some conversion so that it starts at 1 and ends at 60. The getSeconds method returns the current second, 0 to 59. So we can say today.getSeconds, store that in a variable, and it will return a value from 0 to 59. Again, our watches don't use 0 to 59, they use 1 to 60. So we would need to use some JavaScript to convert that over. Finally, we have getMilliseconds, which returns the current milliseconds 0 to 999. Again, you would need to do some conversions. You generally see 1 to 1000. We have some additional methods that give us information about the date, and I am using September 11th, 2017 in these examples. We have today.parse, which will return the number of milliseconds that have elapsed since January 1st, 1970 at midnight local time. And you can see that it returns the number of milliseconds here. We also have today.now, which also returns the number of milliseconds. This is for universal coordinated time. You can see that on the screenshot here. We also have today.toDateString, which can actually be very handy. It actually returns a nicely formatted interpretation of the date. We also have toLocalDateString, and that will again return a readable version of the date. We have toLocalString, which will return a readable version of the date, including the time. We also have toString, and here in the alert, it returns a readable version of the day, time, and also additional information with respect to the time zone. Let's look at a date calculation example. And I'm going to create a countdown until New Year's Day based on when I created this countdown. And the screenshot displays 138 days, which was based on the day that I created this screenshot. All right, so we have two variables here, next year and days new year. So next year is going to be 2023 because we need that in our calculation. All right, so here we have new date dot get full year, and we're adding 1 to it. So get full year would return 2022. We're going to add 1 to it, so we have 2023 right here, being stored in next year. Now we're going to determine how many milliseconds will be in January 1st, 2023. So we have new date, and we're passing it a value, next year, which represents 2023, comma 0, comma 1. So we have year, month, and the day number. Now we are going to access the number of milliseconds right now. So we have new date, storing that in a variable today. Now all we have to do is do some calculations. We're going to be passing an expression to math.round because we're going to be rounding this off so that we don't have a decimal. In the parentheses, days new year, which represents the number of milliseconds, January 1st, 2023, minus today, which represents the number of milliseconds today. That's going to convert to a number. We're going to divide that by 864,000,000, which is the number of milliseconds per day. Then we're going to round that off, and it's going to give us the number of days. So this is an example of using date calculations, which always go back to the milliseconds. These are the different formats that can be used to create a new date. So you don't always have to work with today. Obviously, when you're performing a date calculation, you can work with dates in the future, dates in the past. And I'm just showing you the different types of formats here. And I have a lot of example code for this. Supposing we wanted to return the day of the week, how would we do that? We already have learned that JavaScript returns the day of the week as a number from 0 to 6. 0 representing Sunday, 6 representing Saturday. How convenient. We can use an array. So here we have our array with our days, where 0 would be Sunday, all the way up to 6 would be Saturday. So all we need to do is determine what is the value for the current day that we're in. The first thing we need to do is to instantiate an instance of the date object. I'm storing it in the variable today. Now I have today.getDay. That's going to return a JavaScript number. It's stored in the variable the day. So all I need to do is to swap out the array index value and replace it with the day, and it will match up to the array element in the array, so that if I were to display the date on the page, it would show me the word rather than a number. You can also do that with an if, else if. However, this is very cumbersome. I do not recommend it. The switch statement will work also, and that is a better choice over a chained else if. I would finally like to cover the set timeout method of the window object. This is used in creating a clock. What it does, it executes a function after waiting a specific number of milliseconds. Whenever we work with time in JavaScript, it's always milliseconds. Just to let you know, there are 1,000 milliseconds in 1 second. So here's the set timeout method syntax. The first parameter is the name of the function, comma, the number of milliseconds. So if I had a function that ran a clock on the page, and let me get my clock working here. There we go, there's my clock. I'm going to call that function every second. So the function is actually putting these values on the page, and I'm essentially calling the function every second. Therefore, it looks like an animation, and technically it's not an animation, it's just JavaScript running the function every second. I have a very nice example of how to do this in the sample code, along with additional sample code for the date object.